Welcome back to the Gen Z Speaks podcast. Today's guest, a very special one, presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party. How do you feel, Mr. G?
It was a good podcast. Look, we talked about very important, pressing topics like Gaza. We talked about the economy, taxes, the viability of independent parties, and where the Green Party is going. I hope you guys enjoy the pod. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to support the Gen Z Speaks podcast. We're going to bring you some bangers.
Really great to be with you, Ibrahim and Matt. Glad to be here.
My first question to you is, you went to Harvard, and then you went to Harvard Medical School. You're a physician by trade. What was that moment in your life where you were like, politics, I want to change the entire American political establishment? Like, have you always been political, or was that a journey that you evolved?
It definitely, I grew up during the Vietnam War. And when I was in high school, I was standing on a corner, in front of my public library, having no idea what the war was about, but knowing that there was no reason that my friends and relatives were all like in the target hairs. Why were they going to fight and die in this war that really had nothing to do with us? So that was my introduction to the Democratic and Republican parties, was this murderous war in Vietnam. And I grew up wanting nothing to do with the political system. And it was only after becoming a medical doctor and then getting involved with communities to actually fight for our health, because it's really important. Everybody needs access to health care, but that doesn't make our health. Our health is not made in the doctor's office, right? Our health is happening, if you're growing up without access, in a food desert, if you're growing up with pollution in the air and in the water, without adequate housing, you're going to be sick. That's just the way it works. The determinants of health are really in our communities. So I got involved with marginalized communities, with the whole environmental racism and environmental justice movement. When I was first starting off as a doctor, we saw this epidemic of asthma. We didn't have that when I grew up. We didn't have an epidemic of obesity or diabetes or things like that, especially not in kids. And epidemics of cancer, we didn't have that either. So I was like saying, hey, what's going on here? This isn't, our genes didn't change. Stuff has changed in our communities. So I got very involved in helping communities fight to protect themselves. Yeah. And I discovered that if we want to fix any of what ails us, we have to fix the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system. And that's where I got involved in challenging the political system, mainly through Ralph Nader's campaign, which was the first politics I ever got wind of that didn't smell like a rat. Otherwise, it just seemed like a rat to me. And then I got tricked into running for office as a frustrated, advocate. I got tricked by the Green Party back in the year 2002 into running for office because nothing else was working. And we could organize really great campaigns, like Bernie Sanders did. Yeah. Or in our case, we got money out of politics through a public funding program. We passed a clean elections program for public financing so that politicians would have an alternative to selling their souls to corporations in order to run competitively for office. We passed it, and then the Progressive Democratic Party repealed it in our legislature on a voice vote, blocking any accountability. And that to me was like the last straw and kind of the evidence that the Democratic Party is beyond redemption. It cannot be repaired. And unfortunately, that's been borne out by the course of the next 20 years. That's when I got basically, tricked into running for office, because fighting the system by simply organizing, but not challenging power, wasn't going to do it. And they just kept beating us back. Even when we did everything right and we passed things like campaign finance reform, they would take it away from us. So I realized we got to throw the bums out. And I ran for office out of desperation. And in the course of that first run, I discovered, oh my God, there's so many people exactly like me out there that just don't buy it, that really understand that this politics is a fraud and it is lying and cheating us out of our lives and the possibility of a secure future. So that's when I kind of got, very inspired by political resistance which is an effort really to build a coalition that's big enough to actually change our direction forward.
So that was in the early 2000s where you got tricked. Okay, gotcha.
That's a beautiful trick.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful trick.
Well, if it gets you to take on the establishment, yeah.
Why not?
I never would have done it. Had I known what was actually involved, I never would have done it. But once it happened and I discovered, oh my God, there are all these people out there who feel just like I do. And I got, we fought our way into a televised debate. I was running for governor against Mitt Romney, actually, at the time. Oh, wow. We fought our way into a single televised debate because the public really was going bananas and wanted to hear other options. And in that debate, I basically gave our same agenda, which is not really different now, except that then we called it Green Jobs. We didn't call it a Green New Deal. We called for cutting the bloated military budget and investing our dollars in what we actually need here at home: affordable housing, free public higher education, very similar program, healthcare as a human right through a Medicare for All program, although we called it single payer at the time. Same thing. And all of those suggestions went over like a lead balloon inside the debate hall. There was no live audience. It was just a TV studio. And it all went over like a lead balloon. And I walked out of there thinking, oh, well, I tried, that people aren't with us. And when I walked out of that debate hall, I was mobbed by the press who told me that I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. And like the light bulb went off in my head. And I thought, oh my God, so this whole thing is a scam. It's a scam. Yeah. It's, what Noam Chomsky called, what did he call it? God, I don't have the term in my head, but it's like, it's a concocted, it's a concocted opposition. It's not real. It's not real at all.
Seems like a lot of what the media is doing to us right now, right? It's all concocted schemes. I want to get into like the dual party system, but I want to get to know a little bit more about you. So going back, like before politics, before becoming a doctor, who was your inspiration? Who was your mentor? And like, what was that path like?
I'd have to say, I had a lot of respect for JFK, for John Kennedy, for getting us out of potential nuclear war. I had a lot of respect for him, and for many things he said. He wasn't a perfect guy, but he did, he got into the Bay of Pigs and all that. But he seemed to then realize his mistakes and then try to change direction for the country. And I think that's probably why he got assassinated, because he was really going to change direction. Yeah. But I think he really charted a really important course. So he was an inspiration. And, I'd have to say Martin Luther King was a huge inspiration to me. Many, I'd say like gospel singers and, and Motown, Bob Dylan was at the time too. I was just part of that generation that was really moved to believe that we could change things. And we actually did, even under Richard Nixon and a very conservative Supreme Court. We ended the war in Vietnam and got Roe v. Wade through a very conservative Supreme Court. So those were kind of my heroes at the time. But, I did not, Rosa Parks, I'd say I had great respect for her, but I did not find many honorable actors, in the American political system, which was bought and paid for back then too.
Right.
Still is, yeah.
Yeah, still same concept. Yeah. Speaking of JFK, I mean, you mentioned something earlier about RFK, right? You mentioned, sorry, not RFK, but you mentioned something RFK also agrees with is like the healthcare system, how back in the day, you didn't see this epidemic of asthma, you didn't see this epidemic of obesity, cancer. What is that? I mean, obviously he's changed and he's kind of going with Trump now, right? But do you see any similarities with who you once respected, JFK, with RFK?
I do in some areas. He's been willing to really stand up and challenge industry on a lot of sort of chronic health issues and environmental issues. But having said that, I also, there are some positions he takes that I absolutely don't support. And I think sometimes he doesn't fully understand the science. He's really not trained in the science, although he has to use the science in his lawsuits. He helped, I think, get some pesticides off the market, some very dangerous pesticides, and he helped draw connections on behalf of public health. And, I think he's courageous. I think he's had a huge burden to grow up under, having had so many people assassinated in his own family.
Yeah.
But I don't see him as actually changing the system, because he talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk on a lot of things. Like on war, he says he's a peace candidate, but he's all for, the massacre of Palestinians. Right. He says that he supports campaign finance reform, but in the meantime, he'll take the money of billionaires and work with super PACs and all that. So to my mind, you can't change the system while you're being corrupted by it. So I don't.
And also, like, he claimed to be independent, but then he got, he endorsed Donald Trump for president, and I think he had an opportunity to really stand up to the system, but like
got indoctrinated.
The system is so powerful that even a guy like RFK was like, you know what, I have to pick a side. And I think that is what the problem with the duopoly is that it forces you to pick a side, and it tells people, I think it brainwashes people into believing that if you don't pick a side, your voice doesn't matter. So talk to us about why you think it's important to have a third option, to, just not be complacent with the two-party system that we have today.
So, I think it's important for the same reason that 63% of Americans think it's important, and there are now twice as many Americans who identify as politically independent as there are who identify as either a Democrat or a Republican. Mm-hmm. So, I think this is not rocket science. We have a system of legalized corruption. That's basically how our system works in this country. We also have a system of incredible economic disparities where so much wealth and power is concentrated into the hands of the billionaires. And when you have that much economic disparity, it oozes kind of like an amoeba into everything, and it asserts power and privilege. It corrupts Congress and our state legislatures to passing more laws that provide even greater privilege to them that's got gets, and everybody else kind of continues to lose. And we're now kind of at the point of, we're at the breaking point, I think, for most Americans. Half of all people who rent their place to live are financially strapped, extremely stressed right now, paying 30 to 50% of your income just to keep a roof over your heads, which doesn't leave money to pay for your health insurance and your student debt and everything else. So people are really struggling related to housing. Yet we could implement rent control, and we could be building public housing right now. That was prohibited starting under Bill Clinton. No more dollars into building housing in the public domain that would not be for the purpose of top dollar for the real estate industry. That's who's calling the shots. It's AIPAC and the war contractors, the war profiteers, who are calling the shots in foreign policy. We have a foreign policy right now which is making a beeline for oblivion, both the way that the genocidal war on Gaza is being expanded now into the West Bank, into Lebanon, bombing runs now on Syria and Yemen, and Israel has Iran in its target hairs, as it long has. Bibi Netanyahu has been handed the baton for commander-in-chief. He has zero accountability. And the Biden and Harris and Trump have pledged allegiance to Israel to do what you will. We will be there to support you. And in fact, after Israel did its recent expansion and this devastation of Lebanon, and as well as northern Gaza, they were rewarded another $8 billion by the Biden-Harris administration. So we're in a very precarious position right now. It's really important that we stand up and put an end to it. One last thing, a bomb I want to drop here in case you guys don't know about this, but the draft is back. The military draft is back. It's here, and you're signed up for it. If you are between the ages of 18 and 25, you're in it. And Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration, they're not only sending boots on the ground right now, and it's over 10,000 if you consider the two aircraft carrier battle groups that are sitting in the Middle East right now, one off the coast of Iran, the other off the coast of Gaza, each of them with 5,000 U.S. servicemen and women, another 100 that were sent along with this missile defense system, because the apartheid state of Israel cannot survive even for hours without our active support and involvement. Right. And now Biden has promised boots on the ground, which Harris has also been a part of. boots on the ground if they're needed. Israel's preparing to attack Iran. Russia's prepared to defend Iran. World War III, here we come, which means, we're going to be paying in the blood of our young people as well as with our tax dollars. So we're encouraging everyone to stand up. This is why we need a third party, because the two parties are bought and paid for by AIPAC and the war machine. And the American people need to know what's going on, because we are in the target areas and we do not consent.
Yeah, even beyond foreign policy, like if you look at the economy, like you said, when push comes to shove, both parties capitulate to corporations. If you look at 2010, I know you've talked about this a lot, but with the financial crisis, when push came to shove, Barack Obama gave them he basically let the corporation slide, and at the expense of American middle class families, and so did Bill Clinton. Why? So I want to ask you, why do you think that is, and what can we do specifically to fix the economic disparities that we see in America today?
That's a great question, because these two things are so intertwined. The economic disparities have everything to do with the political disparities, and the powerful economic players are the powerful political players. They are running the shot. They're calling the shots and they're running the show. You can make $1 million contribution to Trump or Harris, and also to libertarians. They accept all these legalized loopholes for corruption. We don't accept that. But that money talks, that money walks. And so if we're going to, the question is always, which is the cart, which is the horse? Where do we intervene? How do we ever break up this system, which is, it's like the self-licking ice cream cone, which is designed to throw us under the bus. It's a sinking ship, whether you're looking at healthcare or student debt or the climate or, expanding war heading towards nuclear. How do we ever fix it? And what I have learned in my years of challenging the system is that you want to do what's on the ground where people are going to get engaged. And right now, there are a lot of people who really want a voice to stop the genocide. This is a hugely galvanizing issue. 68% of Americans, want an immediate end to the genocide. 61% want a weapons embargo right now to Israel in order to enforce the end to this genocide. And we are the only anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker climate emergency option that's on the ballot across the country. And in the last election, 1 out of every 3 eligible voters decided not to vote because they don't buy the duopoly and the way that it is destroying everyday working people. If we could get the word out to them, we could win this election, in the blink of an eye. So, in answer to your question, how do we climb up this, this rock face? It's like you claw your way up that cliff, and it's one step at a time, figuring out where are the issues that we can organize around. And at the end of the day, we have to do the organizing that brings us together. As Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out organized. We have the numbers. We need to build that collaboration. And for the first time, well, I shouldn't say the first time, but it's really, really grown over the 20 years that I've been active. Political collaboration has really grown. Groups used to not want to work with each other at all, but now working together is the name of the game. So we have, Shama Sawant and Workers Strike Back is working with our campaign. Muslim Americans, anti-war, climate emergency, labor, Medicare for all. The people who are still supporting the system, they're out there, but to my mind, they are not like the really dynamic activists. The real organizers, the really committed people now are not flying blind. They get what's happening. They are aware of, the waste, fraud, and abuse being perpetrated by both political parties. People who are really organizers do not buy this lesser evil thing, because there is no lesser evil. We have 2 greater evils, one that's committing genocide right now, the other one that promises to get the job done as quickly as possible. And, if you vote for the lesser evil, you erase all evidence that there is any kind of a movement or any kind of political accountability. So there are a lot of people who are ready to organize, but so many of them, that 1 out of every 3 eligible voters are largely younger, lower income, and of color. So people who are really pretty busy, they're not able to go out and dig up, these are not the policy geeks. So we've got to get word out to people. We got to do door knocking and flyering and phone banking, and a lot of social media stuff and get the word out. If you saw the Breakfast Club interview,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Breakfast Club, says it all right there because they thought they were going to ambush us, but boy, did we punch back. And to read the comments, almost 95%, I'd say. It's very hard to find a comment that doesn't say, I wasn't going to vote before, but now I'm going out to register green and I'm voting Stein where. So this community is really ready to mobilize if only they get the word. So I want to encourage everybody, if you're not already plugged in, go to jillstein2024.com. You can sign up to volunteer. You can make a contribution if you're able, but your labor is a game changer. It's a total game changer. And you can turn your one vote into potentially hundreds of votes if you're doing flyering or phone banking or door knocking. And the website will give you resources to do that. It will help provide support and all that, because this is the perfect storm for that political transition.
Right. Right. I think a lot of people that I talk to, right, they're aware of you. And some of them that are not, they say they feel like that their vote is not going to count if they vote for you. That's just a concern that people have. And to that, I respond back, and I'll give you the opportunity to respond as well. But I think if you really are concerned about the duopoly, the two-party system, progress isn't established like overnight. You can't build Rome tomorrow. It takes time and progress. So for you to recognize the power of your vote and simply refusing to capitulate, that can go a long way. Like the way this happens is through the grassroots. And I want to give you the opportunity as well to respond to somebody who is interested in voting for you, but they're like, well, I'd rather just vote for Trump or Harris to actually make my vote count.
Well, your vote doesn't count. I mean, basically, your vote is erased. Your vote for what you want, your vote to stop the genocide, your vote for health care, your vote to abolish student debt, bail out the students like they bailed out the crooks on Wall Street. The Democrats bailed out the crooks on Wall Street and threw out, 7-8 million homeowners, and neglected the debt of students. So you are erasing all evidence and all demand for accountability. Like Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. That's been true since before the, since before the Civil War. He knew it then, and that is still true now. You have to stand up. We have to be the demand. And this is the propaganda. This is the propaganda, the self-serving propaganda of power holders who want to persuade you that resistance is futile. So give it up and just take marching orders from the economic elites who are basically throwing you under the bus. Take marching orders and continue supporting those who are destroying your future. So, it's like breaking up with an abusive relationship, an abusive domestic relationship where the abused are forever making excuses for their abuser and saying, oh, it'll get better next year, or, oh, they didn't really mean to do it, or whatever, while their lives are kind of going down the drain. But when you stand up and you break up with an abuser, like it's a whole new, like you get your life back. And we do have power. And it's really important not to listen to the mouthpieces of power. And that term I was looking for before is manufactured consent. We have so much of the big corporate media that's trying to manufacture consent, the political parties that are doing it, the DNC. I don't know if you've heard of Tavis Smiley. He's a journalist, very good journalist. And I was doing an interview with him the other day, and he opened the interview. This is a radio interview, and he's got a big audience. He opened the interview saying that he had been contacted by the DNC the night before.
Wow.
Following our schedule and contacting reporters before they talk to us in order to persuade them to smear us and to give them smear information and smear questions. So,
Dr. Stein, like, how is that not anti-democratic? Like, a lot of Democrats accuse Donald Trump, rightly so, of being anti-democratic. But what you're describing right now, what the Democrats are doing to you, is the literal definition of not being democratic, like preventing the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press to understand your policy standpoints. And I also want to add, like, when people don't want to consider the third option, like the Frederick Douglass quote you said, the the last sentence in that quote, I actually want to read it. It says, "The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress."
That's great.
Which is what's happening in America right now. We're like, you know what? We're good with choice A and B. Even though C and D exist, we're like, no, A and B for decade after decade. And then we complain, oh my God, gas prices are so high. Food prices are so high. We're doing this war, that war. We're killing innocent people. But it's like you're refusing to step out of the system and literally exercise the voting power that so many people have fought so hard for. Sorry for that monologue, but I just like that just like sparked the whole,
it's music
like
to my ears. It's really music to my ears. Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, that's it exactly. People are being talked into powerlessness, and we can't allow that. The companion quote to the Frederick Douglass quote is from Alice Walker, who said, the poet, novelist, Palestinian human rights advocate. She says that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. So we need the power. The power is a political necessity. And guess what? We have the power. This is like Malcolm X, who said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. That is the name of the game. And, my experience when I was first tricked into running for office, and doing this debate where my ideas went over like a lead balloon. And then I walked out and I'm told that actually, I just won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. To me, that was my wake up moment that, oh my God, this is a scam. We actually do have the power. People agree with us. We don't have to change people's minds. All we have to do is get the word out and let people know that there is an option that's for them. And to me, that's been like what I've been doing ever since, because once you see the trouble that we're in, whether it's nuclear war, whether it's the climate disaster, whether it is, crushing inequality, then the crashing economy, it's not looking good right now. And, I don't need to tell young people about that because, it's in your lap, it's in your face, and the abuse of the elders is, has landed on you, which is so horribly unfair and outrageous. Yeah. So
100%. So adding on to like this whole third party movement, I think a lot of our generation, a lot of the Gen Z is going on, and we're very unhappy. Just like you said, 63% of America, right?
yes.
A lot of people, but you still hear a lot of people say what Ibrahim just mentioned, right? If you don't vote for A or B, then your vote doesn't matter. But in my response to that always is, if you vote for something you don't believe in, then you're not an honorable person. There's no honor in voting for something that you truly don't believe in, right? Adding on to that, I feel like we hear a lot about the Green Party and its idealistic motivations, and it's a great thing. But then people are like, but it's not practical, right? So it's like, how do you merge practicality and realism so people can, be motivated to vote for the Green Party?
Yeah. So, we encourage people to actually look at our solutions. We're not like pie in the sky stuff. This is like real stuff, which is working either in areas of the country or in countries around the world. It's not only working, but, like, where are we right now? We're spending half of our congressional budget on this endless war machine, of which Gaza is the example. Is that realism?
No.
That genocide is the way of the world. And by the way, we are no longer top dog, and our criminal misleaders, these war criminals in the White House and in Congress are acting like they can make up the rules here. We do have a body of international law and human rights, and we are destroying that. We are tearing that apart because the whole world agrees that this genocide has to stop. This genocide is illegal. It's also, by the way, illegal according to U.S. law. There are 3 sets of laws that are violated by continuing to ship aid to Israel. They are violating human rights. They are interfering with the delivery of humanitarian aid, and they are in violation of the nuclear weapons treaties, the non-proliferation treaty. So there's every reason in the world for us to stand up and do the right thing. And if we destroy this system of international law, which is what's happening by normalizing the torture and murder of children on an industrial scale, there are 2+ million people whose every day is torture. It's not like, they have a fleeting episode where they're abused. No, every day is living torture for the people who are being starved, denied water, They don't have shelter. They are forced to flee while under bombardment.
Right.
I mean, this is like torture on steroids. This is like the most horrific existence one can possibly imagine. And as you were saying, Matthew, this is not honorable. You do not want to vote for this. You do not want to affirm it and endorse it, especially when we have the votes to shut it down.
Right.
We can do that. And this is fundamentally about that power thing, to have the confidence to punch back at this propaganda of powerlessness. This propaganda is intended to tell you that it's absolutely hopeless. It's useless. People are fed this 24/7. So you can see a lot of where this is coming from. People who listen to MSNBC or CNN or who read the New York Times, this is what you are force fed. But if you're listening to other outlets out there, Useful Idiots, for example, or The Gray Zone, Glenn Greenwald, really independent journalism, even on Breaking Points, which is a little bit inside the box, but gets out of it quite a bit.
Shout out Chris on Sagar. Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, they are great. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good.
Right. Yeah.
They're a lot better than most of what's out there. And you got to listen to different stuff. And when you start listening to different stuff, you discover that the pablum you're being fed on mainstream media it's really toxic. It's like, don't even listen to it. Close your ears and start screaming. Do not let that into your brain. So people who are inside of this box, are in a trap. And you can't always help people who are inside an abusive relationship. You can't always help them get out of it. Sometimes you just have to move on and talk to somebody else. And chances are, if you're talking to someone who's really struggling inside the system, they are ready to fight back. And it's people of privilege who aren't. And one of you was asking about, so what's how do you make meaning out of this madness? Well, there's a great quote from the author, I think it's Upton Sinclair, if I remember, the author of The Jungle, who himself was a socialist who ran for governor of New York. And one of his quotes was that you can't teach a man something when his income depends on not knowing it. So people of privilege in particular are very hard to wake up here. They're going to be the last ones to wake up. It's like those who are on the receiving end of the empire and the abuse of working people, the war on working people and the war on our democracy. They're going to be the first ones to wake up. And that's where you want to spend your time, getting the word out to people who are going to side with you. Once you've had that conversation with people who are going to dig in, don't waste your time. They will be changed by the course of history, but you don't have to be the change maker yourself. Not for everybody.
That's what we're seeing, I think, a lot of right now. A lot of these people that are in the box, majority of, I think, the United States, starting to slowly come out, right, and realize, this doesn't make sense. This what it was isn't anymore. 80% of Americans' biggest concerns for President of the United States is the economy. How is it going to influence their pocket, right? And like you said, 50% of the budget is going to wars outside of anything that impacts us, right? And even on top of that, you put taxes on businesses, it trickles down to the cost of the product. You put taxes on the people still are affected. So I don't think the taxing and increasing taxes here or there is the actual solution, just with my limited years of experience. What I think is there's a fault of allocation of this money. How do we go ahead and reallocate that money, restructure what is in place so we actually reap the rewards as citizens?
Yes. Great. And we can come back to the issue of taxes because taxes have been messed with, taxes have been raised on working people and low income people. And this is like the bulk. There are lots of different kinds of taxes. There's property tax and sales tax and capital gains tax and income tax and all that. And they've been sort of rejiggered over the years here to do big giveaways to the wealthiest. And that doesn't trickle down. Those tax breaks to the wealthy really do not help. And they hurt because then that's used as an excuse for austerity and for cutting things like public education and higher education and roads and healthcare and all that. So there is an argument for tax justice. and for taxing vast accumulations of wealth, which is not a healthy thing. Huge disparities in wealth are bad for society all across the board. So there's a definite argument for elements of tax justice. But as you say, there are huge problems of misallocation here. So one of them is the military. Instead of spending half of our budget, and actually it's way more than half if you include taking care of our wounded soldiers, which we should do a much better job of.
Right.
The nuclear weapons budget, which is also huge. These are things that, this all adds up to more like 63% of our budget, not just 50%. So that can be cut massively, and we'll still be spending way more than any of our, nearest competitors. So we can reallocate military dollars instead of exploding the world, creating a migrant crisis, which is coming to our doorstep to help fix what we have caused. Creating failed states and just continuing so-called terrorist threats. We can move to a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy rather than asserting military might. According to the Senate, the Congressional Research Service, actually, the U.S. has sent in the military 250 times in the last 30 years alone. So we do this all the time. It's absolutely staggering. We have 800 foreign military bases. The next biggest competitor has like 30. So we are the empire to end all empires, and this is not helping us. So we need to cut that imperial budget, put those dollars back to work here. That's a big winner. Also on healthcare, we're wasting 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars. It's over $4 trillion per year, and 1 out of every 3 is basically spent on paper pushing and record keeping, and not useful records, not medical records. Just like trying to figure out if you went into the hospital, did you get an aspirin, and did you have a Band-Aid, and what kind of CAT scan did you have, and which insurance company do you have, which policy do you have within that company, and what do they cover on Band-Aids, and what do they cover for aspirin and for CT scans, etc. So this is an elaborate system of minutia. It's a mountain of minutia and bureaucracy. We can cut that through a Medicare for All system, which basically has one insurer, one quasi-governmental insurer. But it's like Medicare. People like their Medicare. The overhead in Medicare is about 3%. The overhead in the private system is around 30%. So what's wrong with this picture is that how we could do it right: expand healthcare through Medicare for All, cover everything: your mental health, your dental care, your eye care, your reproductive health care, everything. Everything is covered, including chronic care. So if your parents need home care, they've got Alzheimer's or some kind of chronic disease, or you have a child who's disabled who needs chronic care, that gets covered too. And the system has so much waste in it that we could basically expand it to fully cover everyone comprehensively and still save $500 billion a year. So this also speaks to that issue of reallocation and how we could spend our dollars right.
Yeah, we need healthcare reform in this country ASAP. Like, it's long overdue. I do want to ask you a criticism that's leveled against you, and I'm sure you're probably tired of answering this question, but AOC and the DNC chair, they're always saying you're a Russian agent. You show up every 4 years. What do you have to say to them? And secondly, I understand that the system in place right now makes it very hard for independent people and third-party candidates to run for office, just in even on a congressional level. It's very hard. So what do you have to say to those people, though, that say that you show up every 4 years just to run elections? Obviously that's not true, but how do you respond to those people that are constantly just leveling this accusation against you?
So these are trolls, and
right. In many cases, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't worry too much about changing their minds. They're going to do their thing anyhow. But just for the record, I was thoroughly investigated by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they found for 3 years. Yes, they found absolutely nothing. Got a full exoneration, basically, that there was nothing, illegal or inappropriate in any of my actions. I had all my receipts. Nobody paid me any money whatsoever, or even paid my transportation. I went to a global media event in Moscow to speak to our agenda, which was to stop the bombing in Syria, for a peace initiative, a peace offensive in the Middle East, for a nuclear weapons a treaty to abolish nuclear weapons and for a global Green New Deal. If only our current leaders would get behind something like that and would actually talk to our adversaries as well as our allies. That's what we're supposed to do. This was just a nonsense propaganda campaign, and they still keep rerunning it because they don't have anything else to go on. And this charge that I'm a predatory candidate because I come out every 4 years. Well, even if you came out every 4 years, how is that predatory exactly?
Yeah.
You know, if you're offering
They're going
people
to say anything they can.
Yeah, exactly. This is complete baloney. But we don't just come out every 4 years, you know, and I didn't run last, 4 years ago anyhow. So, this is like nonsense. What goes away is the mainstream media. And for those who are only tuned in to mainstream media, well, that's why they are so brain dead, in the first place. And that's just not true. We have currently 150 local office holders. We've had over 1,500 over the last 2 decades. So this is just plain old BS from a party which is really running scared right now because it knows that people are breaking away, that its days are numbered, and this should be, a great cause for encouragement and celebration that the political elites are coming after us because they are very afraid, and they should be.
Dr. Stein, I have a follow-up on that, though. What is the Green Party's plan to increase federal representation? Right now, you don't have any Green Party members either in the Senate or the House. So is there a feasible plan in place to increase that representation?
Yes, absolutely. And we play on a very steeply tilted playing field. So we have had some members of state legislatures, and also county commissioners, but we haven't really gotten above that level because these are very big money campaigns. It's very hard to play when the press won't cover you, and when basically our elections are bought and paid for. So it's very hard. We run at higher levels because we have to. That's the way the system works. The rules that were written by Democrats and Republicans require us to run statewide and nationally in order to keep our ballot lines. So we have to do this, but in the course of doing this, we have discovered that we're the only options out there for an alternative to genocide and war, and that there's enormous interest and hunger in what we do. So we do continue to run at higher levels, but our focus has always been on local races. And so we really encourage people, first of all, get out there and help others mobilize in this race, because the stronger we finish, the bigger head of steam we'll have coming out of this and going into the next phase, which is rolling over campaign activists into party activists so that we can build with solidarity and, get to critical mass and support candidates to challenge the system. Because if you elect a city councilor, then you have a fighting chance for a local resolution for a ceasefire. There are things that you can do not only at the local level, but also which affect the state and national level too.
Right. We're nearing the end here, but I do want to ask you about the genocide in Gaza. My biggest concern is the genocide in Gaza puts us one step closer to World War III. I'm a Muslim, and I'm part of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And our caliph, who was elected in 2003, 2 weeks in, this is what he said. He said, "It is apparent from the current situation of the world that it is heading towards destruction." This is in 2003. In 2012, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, he wrote a letter to Benjamin Netanyahu, and he said, "It is my request to you that instead of leading the world into the grip of a world war, make maximum efforts to save the world from a global catastrophe. Instead of resolving disputes with force, you should try to resolve them through dialogue so that we can gift our future generations a bright future rather than gift them disability and defects." And I think sadly right now, we're gifting the innocent Palestinians defects, disabilities, all through the expense of the American taxpaying dollar. I know it's bold of you to stand up against the genocide, but is there any way, in your opinion, to change the Democratic Party stance on Gaza, or do you think the genocide in Gaza will never be resolved as long as Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is in office?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's going to be very hard to fix the genocide in Gaza because we may be able to stop the genocide, but then we still have the ethnic cleansing, we still have the occupation, we still have the apartheid state of Israel. So, as Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense said back in the 1980s, that Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the United States in the Middle East. Israel is basically a military outpost for continuing economic and military domination in the Middle East. The US and Israel are not going to back off until we begin to move from a monopolar world with the US dominating to a multipolar world that operates according to international law, human rights, and diplomacy, that we can resolve our issues peacefully instead of going to war, which is kind of the foreign policy that the US has operated on ever since the Second World War. And in my own decades of political activism, and even before I was an activist, we saw efforts to reform the Democratic Party forever. That's been going on as long as I've been on this planet, since the 1960s. There was an effort called the realignment movement, which attempted to bring together civil rights and labor in order to reform the Democratic Party, but that failed largely around the war in Vietnam, that you couldn't touch the war in Vietnam within the Democratic Party. So it has proven itself. Every time there's a new rising generation of voters, there's a new struggle, but it's about the same old stuff. The Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, has been bought and paid for. That's why, we need a really transformational movement right now. We're not going to solve this around the margins. Yeah. And we shouldn't be talked into lowballing this. We have to stop the genocide, and we have to change our foreign policy fundamentally. We need that not only for the stability of the world and the survival of the world, and avoiding nuclear war. And your Caliph is absolutely right on about what we're heading for. I completely agree with him. But also about the survival of the American people, who are more and more precarious. With every passing month, things are not getting better. They're getting worse and worse for the American people, especially as we're we're progressively destroying the environment and the air and our water quality, as well as wildlife, and we're part of this, this web of life. And if you destroy the web of life, well, we're falling through, as well. We cannot dismiss that 75% of wildlife is basically gone. Populations have declined 75% in like the last 40 or 50 years, something like that. So we're in desperate straits right now. And, people aren't even looking at the climate crisis now because, and the water crisis and the crisis of our oceans, and drought and all that. We're not looking at it because the genocide is so absolutely riveting. But we got a lot of problems that are basically the equivalent of the mushroom cloud that are hovering in the distance right now. And any of them could be set off. So I think we are in a different moment of consciousness right now. In the same way, once the astronauts went up and they got the shots of the Earth, that helped kind of trigger the environmental movement. People saw this little blue planet out there in the great black space, like I am right now, because the sun has gone down. So
we saw that
in the darkness. In the void. I'm a voice calling out the void right now. The environmental movements saw that, and that kind of helped trigger things. Well, I think there's another kind of wake up, big, deep kind of consciousness raising going on right now, where people are really understanding that empire is not compatible with our continuing survival. So we need to fundamentally shift both the effect of empire abroad and the effect of empire at home. So this will be a win-win, and there's a lot of people waking up. One of Martin Luther King's great quotes, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It is bending right now in a very big way, and people are experiencing this. It's almost like, a birthing. It's like a new world is being born right now in kind of painful way, and it's not without its its risks, but we have no choice. We cannot otherwise go forward and expect to survive on this planet as a civilization as we know it. So a lot of people are stepping up, and this is the flip side of this, utterly dark and tragic moment of genocide with our tax dollars, without our consent. The flip side of that is that humanitarians are stepping up all over the place, are coming out of the woodwork. This is really sorting the wheat from the chaff. And people whose hearts and souls are alive are stepping up and coming together around a broader agenda for human rights, for diplomacy, for climate survival, for dignity, for all people, for justice, for an end to empire and colonialism, and for basic, to get our democracy off of life support and happening again. There are enough of us now who get it, who are here for the long haul. Once you see the problem, you can't unsee it. But once you see the solution, you can't unsee that either. And, here we are, the universe is bending and we're part of it. And I'm just seeing that my battery, actually, my computer somehow didn't get plugged in. Oh. So it's about to go as well. Okay. So on many
last thing here real quick, I know your battery's about to die. Speaking of moral justice, though, Donald Trump loves to say that if Kamala Harris wins, that the country is over. I hate when he says that because I'm a total American. Do you think the country is over if Kamala wins?
No, I think we will survive and we will fight, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I think, we, the American people, there's no going back. We know our power and we know where we have to go. And we may not get there, in the next week. That's okay. We just want to make progress forward and emerge as strong as we can coming out of this election. And, and then just hit the ground running, starting, if not the first day, then probably the first week after the election. So let's be in touch, and really great talking with you and getting to know you.
Love to hear that.
Likewise. Yeah, really, really delighted to learn about you and what you're doing. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Jill Stein. Thank you.
Power to the people, free Palestine. Thank you.
There we go.
Free Palestine.